Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 8th YouTube session of the Read for Pixel's 8th International Women's Day edition of our, the Pixel Project's 8th International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 14 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project's work to end violence against women. So I'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later. But meanwhile, if you want to find out about the Pixel Project and all the amazing work that we do, go to www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so we have a very special guest for today's session. We have the fabulous fantasy and romance author, Jeffe Kennedy. Here she is. Hi, Jeffe.
Hi.
So let me tell you all about her. Jeffe is an award-winning author whose works include novels, nonfiction, poetry, and short fiction. She has won the prestigious Rita Award from Romance Writers of America and has been a finalist twice, been a UCross Foundation Fellow, received the Wyoming Arts Council Fellowship for Poetry, and she was awarded a Frank Nelson Doubleday Memorial Award. And she is currently the president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. So, besides generously donating her time today, Jeffe has also donated 3 exclusive goodie bundles to the stash of author treats that we have set up as perks for our donors on our Rally Up fundraising page. So, let me tell you about them. Now, the first one is for donors in the US only. Now, this is pretty amazing. Jeffe Kennedy is offering a rare Tuckerization bundle for one very generous Read for Pixels donor in the US. So this is one opportunity to name a minor character in Jeffe's next book. And then you get a signed copy of the book when it's released to keep as a memento. Now, there's just one of this unique treat available. So donate $500 now before someone else does, and Jeffe will make sure you live forever as a memorable minor character in the imagination of her readers worldwide. So amazing. Now, the next 2 are for donors anywhere in the world. So goodie bundle number 2 is a one-to-one Zoom chat with Jeffe Kennedy herself. So Jeffe is offering a chance for one generous donor to claim a 30-minute video chat during which Jeffe would be happy to share her insights on the art and craft of writing, chat about the business of publishing, or even just shoot the breeze about books and life with you. So if you've seen Jeffe's what's that? First cup of coffee in the morning. It's pretty cool. So I feel it'll be very nice to chat with Jeffe for 30 minutes about just stuff, So the goodie number 3, also for donors anywhere in the world, is Jeffe Kennedy's Critiques bundle. So if you are a novice romance, science fiction, fantasy, or a general women's fiction author looking for a professional critique of your work, look no further. Jeffe is offering a fabulous critique bundle for one Read for Pixels donor. This bundle comprises one written critique of your query letter draft, one critique of the first chapter of your work in progress, which will be 5,000 words maximum, and one 30-minute Zoom call to discuss this critique. And this is a wonderful opportunity for anyone working on getting their first book published to get an expert guidance from one of today's best-loved fantasy authors, who is also currently president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. So, 3 bundles there. Our chat box moderators are putting the links up in the chat box, so go ahead and go and find them and get them. I will also give you an opportunity later to get him. Okay, so we've raised $2,077 towards our $5,000 goal so far, which is about 41%. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on April 15th. And remember, all funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Join the cause and donate. Okay, so now Jeffe's going to do a reading, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. But before we start that, you, the audience, can participate. So you will be able to ask Jeffe questions. Just make sure you're logged onto your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box that's on the right-hand side of your screen. And our YouTube moderator, Xiaoqin, will relay them to me, and I will read them out to Jeffe to answer. All right, so over to you, Jeffe. What will you be reading for us today?
Thank you, Anusha. I'm going to be reading from my book, Dark Wizard. It's the first book in a trilogy, a complete trilogy at this point. And the what I tried to do with this series is I approached it a little bit more metaphorically. In this world, there are wizards and there are familiars. And the wizards are able to wield magic in order to accomplish things. And familiars generate and have magic, but they're not able to use it themselves. And so there's a whole society that has been built upon this particular dynamic because the wizards want to have familiars in order to use them essentially as magical batteries. And the familiars end up having very few rights at all. And because they're basically there to serve their wizards. And I deliberately made this a non-gendered phenomenon that a familiar may be male or female. Same with wizards. They might be non-binary. The pairings are not necessarily hetero or what have you. And so what I was hoping to do with this world is to show what a power differential does, how it affects a whole society and how it affects the people in it, but viewing it through a slightly different lens because it's not gendered. And so it's been very interesting hearing the reactions to these books. And a lot of people have really loved them, which is fabulous. And then there are some people who say, get frustrated because they'll say, it really upsets me how powerless the familiars are. And I don't want to read about that. And I'm like, well, have you looked around at our world, at the world we live in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the scene I'm going to read is a scene from about the middle of the book of Dark Wizard. And what has happened is the female main character, Nick, was paired up with a wizard, Gabriel, and she tried to evade the match and escaped. And he tracked her down and found her. And the society, which is called the Convocation, sent hunters after her also. And so he goes after her in part because he knows that the hunters are going to hurt her. And he has managed to retrieve her. They're on this barge. They're trying to have a conversation. He's a little bit of a rogue in that he grew up outside of Convocation Society. He comes from a family that was removed from the Convocation rosters. And so he doesn't have a formal magical education. And he has been very surprised to discover how strict the society is and to confront the expectations. And so he is actually a very gentle person and egalitarian minded. And so they're still butting heads at this point, but they've started to come together. And then the hunters have attacked. They've swum out and appeared on this barge. So this is a scene between them. And it's just the moments after the hunters have attacked. So they've been inside this cabin, and he's more of a warrior type as well as a sorcerer, but he's not very good at being a wizard yet. So here is the scene. I shall read it for you for a few minutes here. Gabriel yanked the door open and charged out, skewering the hunter that had been pounding on it. She slammed the door and barred it with shaking hands, then whirled to face the splintered hole in the cabin roof. The hunter was still up there, biting at the wood, tearing at it with both hind paws and the remaining front one. Fragments of wood and bloody spittle rained down. It paused in its snarling efforts to thrust its snout through the shards of wood, pushing its way through. Nick swiped at it with the blade, fruitlessly, as even the small cabin was taller than she could reach. The hunter did jerk back, however, turning its head to eye her. Lady Veronica Ilal, it crooned almost politely. You will come quietly. I am Lady Veronica Fell, in the company of my wizard and husband, Lord Fell, she informed it loftily. You will desist in your hunt. You are an outlaw, and as such cannot command us, it hissed. We answer to the convocation. Yield and come quietly. Vale had stopped screaming, and Nick couldn't hear anything but the sound of waves slapping the hull and the cries of seabirds. The barge shimmied, turning in the waves and dipping enough that she had to steady herself against the wall. Gabriel's magic was no longer pushing them along, the barge bobbing at the mercy of the natural currents. Hopefully that meant he was preoccupied and not incapacitated. She had to get out there, but she didn't want this thing tackling her from the roof as soon as she emerged. All right, she said, come on in. You will come out. I don't think so. She ran a hand over her braid as if it were elegantly styled. It's raining and I don't want to mess up my hair. You will come out and come quietly, it insisted. Not too bright, are you? I have no intention of leaving this cabin. Then you will be dragged out. It yanked its head back and grabbed the ragged edge of the ceiling hole with long claws, tearing at it. Nick moved out of the way, clutching the enchanted dagger and preparing to strike. She could kill at least this one. Behind her, the glass in the porthole shattered, and she ducked, covering her head like a ninny. The hunter above tore away at the board with a roar of triumph, and another shoved its snapping jaws through the porthole. Nick tightened her fist on the dagger. A strike anywhere would do, and plunged the blade into the soft black nose, tipping the hunter's snout. With a strangled howl, it jerked back, nearly pulling the blade from her hand, and then shattered into gobs of goop like the others had. Ha! She shouted in excited victory. Not so helpless in a fight this time. Her head snapped back, the grip on her braid painfully yanking her backward, nearly off her feet, and the stink of rotting meat made her gag. Claws raked her neck as they seized her collar. What's this? The hunter barked in her ear. Where are the hunters who collared you? Dead, she snarled. With the dagger still in her fist, she punched down and back, catching the thing with a meaty thunk. It screamed in her ear, a howl of agony that drained into nothing as it faded away. 2 down. Were there 5 or 6? 5 had come after her, but it seemed like there had been 6 on the barge, or she had counted 1 twice. Not giving herself time to think about it, she threw up the bar and ran out the door, skidding as her boots hit the slick of hunter goo from the one she'd killed at the porthole. Ugh, 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 she chanted, catching her balance on the bobbing deck and looking wildly around for Gabriel. Nothing in sight but the pitching barge. Surely it couldn't be good for them to be crosswise to the waves. The drizzling rain and gray shoreline not far away. Struggling to stay upright, she clung to the cabin wall with her free hand, working her way stealthily to the attached overhang. Vale, wide-eyed and frothing at the mouth, yanked on the rope halter that tethered him loosely to the manger. Blood ran down one flank, a crushed and twitching hunter under his hooves. At least the horse was intact and hadn't gone overboard. Good boy, she murmured, holding out her hand so he'd catch her familiar scent. He recognized her or her aerial magic and snorted, calming. The hunter looked too mangled to be much trouble, but Nick wasn't inclined to take chances. Finding a decent-sized chunk, she plunged the dagger into it, observing its transformation to harmless goo with satisfaction. 3, she declared. Rising from her crouch, she stroked Vale's neck, leaning against him for a moment to steady them both. Where's Gabriel, huh? Vale snorted an answer in Horse, which she naturally didn't understand. Well, there were only 2 places Gabriel could be, the other side of the cabin or in the sea. She ducked under Vale's neck and flattened herself against the wall on the other side of Vale's manger, trying to move silently and wondering what she'd do if Gabriel had been killed or drowned. She had still belonged to House Fell, but so far as anyone knew, Gabriel had no heirs. Very likely the convocation would deregister the house again and reassign her to another wizard, and she'd no longer have the right of summary dismissal. Her child would be taken away from her to become a ward of the convocation. Not a pleasant prospect for either of them. She had reached the corner of the cabin, afraid to look. If Gabriel was dead or lost, she could maybe swim to shore. Casting a look in that direction, she mentally amended that idea. Instead of swimming, she could wait for the barge to break up on the rocks and hope to survive. Though if Gabriel was dead or lost, she would be at the mercy of the hunters who could overpower her. Also, she didn't want him dead. Blame her stupid sentimental heart for that. Moving slowly, she peeked around the corner of the cabin and clamped her lips on the gasp that wanted to escape. Gabriel stood like a statue, a furious giant compared to the two smaller hunters slinking around him as they swathed him in rope, tying him to a post used for anchoring crates. A third stood before him, black lips curled back from its fangs. Lord Fell, you have made a grave mistake in interfering with us. I told you back in Elal that there would be consequences if you persisted. You should have gone home. The familiar is mine, Gabriel ground out, struggling against more than the rope. Something held him in place, a magical compulsion of some sort. You have no rights to Lady Veronica. She is mine by convocation law. If so, the convocation will return your property to you. We will take custody of her now. My companions will bring her out and we'll be gone. I suggest you do not follow us. Gabriel's jaws clenched, his shoulder, chest, and arm muscles flexing, but he didn't budge. Release me, he roared. The hunter's jaw dropped into a mockery of a grin. I don't think so, Lord Fell. It flicked its gaze to the quiet cabin, snapping its jaws closed. Get the familiar, it told its minions. Both slunk toward the cabin. A golden opportunity. With a scream of rage, Nick raced toward the hunter leader, dagger at the ready. Both hunter and wizard gaped at her in identical shock. Gabriel recovered faster. Nick, no, he yelled. Use your magic, you idiot, she screamed. She flung herself at the hunter, hoping to get a lucky strike in. This one was smarter than most, deftly grappling her, its sinuous limbs stronger than they seemed. Magically enhanced, no doubt. She disregarded its intimidating teeth and claws, counting on the fact that the hunters had instructions to bring her back unharmed. She managed a shallow slice with the knife, and it screamed in pain, but the strike wasn't enough to dissolve it. Worse, it now knew to disarm her. Its clawed fingers wrapped around her knife hand as it threw its shoulder into her breast, shockingly painful on the tender tissue, and stretched her arm out. Her shoulder and elbow ligaments shrieked at the overextension, and it felt like her wrist bones were fragmenting under the crushing grip. The hunter sank sharp teeth into her forearm, and she dropped the blade. A wave of water doused them both, and they went skidding across the tilting barge deck. Nick, hold on, Gabriel shouted. Easier said than done. She scrabbled for purchase, digging her fingers into a lucky gap between planks, ignoring the bite of splinters. Blinking salt water out of her stinging eyes, she glimpsed the hunter not far away. All four sets of claws dug into the wooden deck, jaws open in a feral snarl, black tongue hanging out between multiple rows of fangs. A wave of water rose behind it, curling unnaturally as it built, and then slammed down on the hunter, dragging it toward the edge. It fought, formidable claws raking furrows in the deck. Nick struggled to her hands and knees, glimpsed the hunters galloping on all fours for Gabriel. Behind you, she screamed, crawling up toward him. He tried to pivot, curse him for a fool, muscles straining against the ropes as he tried to lift the sword hanging limply by his side. Use magic, she yelled at him, lunging to wrap one hand around his booted ankle, holding on for dear life. Hot water, she added, and he focused his wizard black eyes on the hunter nearly upon them. A wave leapt from the sea, billowing with steam, and engulfed the hunter. It yelped, spasmed, and went still. Its fellow tried to dodge, but the boiling water, coiling like a living thing, curled and pounced. The hunter howled and thrashed, then went limp, leaving the nauseating scent of cooked meat in the air. The lead hunter had regained its feet, stalking toward them, holding up its clawed hands in surrender. Lord Fell, it crooned. I was perhaps hasty. Let us. The bubble of water narrowed to a lance and shot straight through the center of its chest. It swayed, astonished, the sea visible through the hole in its lean body. Then it collapsed in a heap. The dagger, Gabriel said, before they heal. Nick let go of his ankle, looked around wildly, not seeing it anywhere. I think it went overboard. Then they will too. I can move again. Cut me loose. I can shove a body overboard. You concentrate on keeping us off those rocks. Nick pointed at the perilously looming crags. Gabriel's head whipped around and he cursed viciously. The barge shuddered as the sea grabbed it, as if giant hands had taken a hold of the vessel. Spray fountained around them at the sudden resistance. Nick staggered to the lead hunter, intent on getting him and whatever spell he had used to immobilize Gabriel into the water. Already the tissue was knitting around the edges of the gaping hole in its chest. If it could heal from that, it likely couldn't drown, but it also wouldn't be in any shape to swim or chase after them anytime soon. With any luck, something would eat it while it was disabled. With a grunt, she rolled the hunter over the edge and into the foaming sea. The barge lurched massively just then, and she nearly pitched in after it. And I'll stop there since I'm out of time.
Thanks, Jeffe. That was very exciting, actually. Okay, so I'm going to just jump right into our questions.
All right.
All right. And again, everybody, if you want to ask Jeffe your questions, don't forget you can type them into the chat box on your screen and I'll ask them for you. Okay, so you've created plenty of fantastic female characters, Jeffe. We just saw Nick, who's pretty awesome. And there's Zephyr, there's Eutelia, there's the sisters Ursula, Andromeda, and Amelia, and there's so many more. All of them are complex and compelling characters with distinct personalities, and they all have agency. So my first question is, what or who are your inspirations for your female characters?
Well, I always feel like my characters come to me. I'm a character-driven writer, and so I think it was Philip Jose Older who said that writing fiction is like building a campfire that then sends a light into other worlds, and you invite people to come and sit at the campfire and tell you their stories. And that's how it often feels for me, that my characters come and tell me their stories. But I've also been privileged to know many phenomenal women in my life, and I draw bits and pieces from various people and their stories and what they have endured and triumphed over.
That's cool. So, with all genres, fantasy and romance also have their share of female stereotypes and tropes. And how do you yourself go about breaking stereotypes in fantasy to create and write distinctive female characters with agency?
One way that I often talk about is, particularly in fantasy, there is a tendency to go knee-jerk, faux medieval, where we have this idea that fantasy worlds are somehow always this non-tech world that's a patriarchal society where women are in sexual peril and therefore their lives are circumscribed by that sexual peril, and that they are basically at home doing child rearing and traditional domestic activities. And it's frustrating to me because, particularly as fantasy writers, we get to create our alternate worlds, and there is no reason why our alternate worlds have to be cast in this same patriarchal mold that happens. So one thing that I often encourage writers to think about is, if you are making your world be a place where women are in sexual peril, why? I mean, why are you going to that? Why is this not a world where people don't tolerate that kind of thing? Because that idea of the sexual peril drives so much, that virginity must be protected, and that daughters must be kept safe, and that women can't go out after dark, and all of these things. But if you imagine a world without violence against women, which is what we are trying to imagine for our own world with the efforts that you guys are putting into this, that changes things. If you have guards or military or other kinds of fighters that are entirely men, why did you choose that? Why did you create a world where women don't know how to fight? There's plenty of evidence and ways where women can be powerful fighters as well. So if you've chosen not to do that, why are you choosing it? All of these things are choices that we make as authors. And I think an easy way to, or maybe not easy, but a technique for this, a tool to get around this is, we talk about our programming a lot, and that the first reaction we have to something or someone is usually our programmed response. And then when we think about it, take a moment to consider, then our next response is what we choose. So when we are writing, we're very often getting in the flow, and we're putting in the knee-jerk responses, the programmed responses. And then when you go back over it, then you take that second look and you're like, why did I choose this? Why did I choose to make this character male? Why did I choose to make this character a fighter and not this one? And I do that in my own work. Like, I'll go back through and it's like, why did I make the groom in the stable male? There's no reason for that. And so that's one way to get at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so in your stories, many of the women, they do hold positions of authority and leadership, right? But
Yes.
then you also depict places where women are considered property, like Nick is considered the wizard's property. And there are other places where the women's only role is wife and mother. Why did you create such starkly contrasting cultures in terms of their treatment and attitudes towards women and girls?
Well, because you could tell different kinds of stories with that. It's great to tell a story, like in my 12 Kingdoms and Uncharted Realms books, where the eldest princess is the heir to the throne, and she's a warrior woman, and she becomes the High Queen. And there are really fun things to do with Ursula, that character, with her struggles in trying to be a wise and fair leader. But there are things that she deals with in her life that are totally different than, say, Nick deals with in her world. And as I mentioned, I wanted to make the world of Dark Wizard be non-gendered, so it wasn't just the female familiars who are facing being property, but anyone who's a familiar of any gender. It's just exploring different kinds of stories and different kinds of challenges for characters.
That'd be cool. Okay, so my next question is about motherhood in your books. So women in the highest positions of authority, like Ursula you just mentioned, they have children, and there's no question that they will continue doing their jobs. And you also don't shy away from showing that mothers have interests and skills outside of motherhood, and they do make mistakes. So how do you strike that note of empathy and humanity when writing about mothers and their complicated relationship with motherhood?
I almost want to say, how do you not? It's
Okay.
I've always, like when people ask me, or it used to be a question I got a lot more in like the 80s, but when people would ask me if I'm a feminist, I would say, well, by that, do you mean I believe that women are people first and females second? And yes. And I think motherhood is a huge part of being female, whether you choose to have children or have children thrust upon you in some way, or if you choose not to. that it's a big part of being female is that, dealing with sexuality and birth control and maybe having a baby or deciding not to have a baby. Uh, and it's frustrating to me sometimes, like in fantasy books where you'll have an amazing female character who's, like a swordswoman or a sorcerer or something like that, going out doing all the things, but she never has a period. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
these are, I think this is part of representing what women's lives are like. It's one reason why I don't agree with, there are some readers who say that we should never feature female characters who are dealing with rape or sexual assault or um, sexual abuse very young. It's like, well, if we take that out entirely, if we pretend that that never happens to anybody, then you're taking away something that is something that many women struggle with. And are we really telling a woman's story if we pretend like that isn't a thing, unless we make it a world where it isn't a thing, and then that has repercussions too.
Interesting. All right. So, okay. So my next question is about female. Okay. So if your female characters are generally flawed and they're humans, right? Like nobody is perfect. Over the years, quite a few female Read for Pixels authors have told us that they have felt cultural and social and even commercial pressure to ensure that their female characters are likable or relatable. Have you ever felt the same kind of pressure?
Sure. Yeah, it's a thing, right? Where women are judged very harshly, and female characters are judged in the same way if they are not nice and pleasant and accommodating. And it can be really frustrating because we could think of countless examples of male characters who are brooding and angry and incredibly difficult to deal with, and they get to go off and be brooding and angry, and it's sexy. But if a woman is brooding and angry, then oh no, that's beyond the pale. We can't be doing that. And I think what we have to do is just keep writing it, because women are human beings who are occasionally angry and brooding. And if you're trying to get something done, whether it's a domestic task or running a village or running a kingdom or trying to kill an enemy, then you don't have to be sunshiny and nice about it.
Yeah. Isn't it weird how people forget that women are people?
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny because I've, as I said, I grew up in the 80s and things have changed a whole lot. But one thing that I love about that the younger women have really made clear to me is the idea of that I don't exist to decorate your world.
Yeah, that's right.
And I try to do that with my female characters. It's like, that's not why they're there.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We have an interesting question from someone in the audience. This is from Misty306. Hi, Misty. Misty is one of our regular people who come and watch our live streams. So Misty asked, you and other authors write about fairies in a way they are their own beings while having similarities to humans. Do you believe fae males treat their females better than human ones?
I think it depends on who's writing them, right? Because this comes back to choosing your world. What kind of alternate world are you writing? Some authors will get really hung up on, I think especially newer authors will get hung up on, oh, well, I have to write fairies. These are the rules for fairies. And you have to point out to them that it's like, well, unless you actually know any fairies, then you get to decide what your fairies are like, and you get to decide what your fairy world is like. So you can set it up that, your fairy world is a place where, magic is this great leveler, right? So if your fairy females have the same amount of magic as the fairy males, then you don't have this dimorphism that drives so much of the patriarchy that I've been talking about, where females have to be protected from sexual peril and where they are physically weaker. So yeah, I can certainly see, I think that people tend to treat other people better if they don't have full power over them. And so that's one way to ensure that you're treated well, right? Is if you have power of your own.
Yep. Okay. Well, speaking of men, let's talk about the men in your books.
Oh.
So your books also feature a diverse range of men, from horrible abusive villains to men who respect women. And we also see that the male-female relationships between the main characters are pretty equitable. And there is always a danger of stereotyping men too. For example, Astar could be your stereotypical alpha male, but he actually isn't. So do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways science fiction fantasy writers can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yes. I mean, so much this. I think that this is another thing that I've seen change over the years that I really appreciate with the reframing instructions for women on how not to get raped, that instead of telling women this is what you have to do to avoid being raped, instead we teach our boys this is how you don't rape women. And it's maybe seems self-evident to younger people now, but it's a huge pivot because it didn't used to be viewed that way, that there was always this perspective of that boys will be boys. And I think that, yes, when we write our men in books, that you can write a man who finds rape abhorrent. You can find a man who wants to be equal with his female partner. That's part of what I'm doing in the Dark Wizard books, is that Gabriel is this incredibly fair-minded person, and he doesn't want to own Nick. He doesn't. It actually is very upsetting to him that she clings to these ideas of, no, this is how it has to be. And he's like, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to be partners in this. Why can't we be partners? And their relationship evolves that way. And it turns into something that eventually is turning over the society, which is how I think these things work.
Mm-hmm. All right. So do you think then that eventually this violent alpha male type character would phase out of SFF culture as worldwide we start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that is going to stick around for much longer than expected?
It's a good question. I think that there's something about the very alpha male, again, like the brooding, very strong masculine character with that whole trope is, and perhaps archetype, which is sexy. There is part of that is sexy and that is compelling, and we enjoy the fantasy of that. A lot of readers who talk about, like these alpha male characters freely acknowledge that's like, well, I find him sexy, but I would never want to be married to this guy. And I think that, it's not someone you'd want to live with day in, day out. But I think what we're doing now is we're moving that and having someone who has those characteristics that we find sexy and exciting, but then also giving them, like the cinnamon roll interior or the heart of gold, or redeeming them in some way where they suffer and realize that they are not being a good person, and they become a better human being. I think that there is a lot less tolerance for a male character who never changes, who is absolutely awful all the time, like some of the books, like the romance books from the 70s and 80s that were just like entirely rape-tastic, and like he never changes. I don't think anybody really wants that anymore.
Definitely not. All right, so we have, we definitely, We have another question from the audience, also from Misty again. So keep your questions coming, everybody. We want more questions. So Misty asks, in the recent scenarios regarding both the RTA awards and some speculative fiction awards exposed how some male authors believe that the status quo is changing too much. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, in a word, I would say boo-hoo. I'm not very sympathetic to this, but I think when men complain to me about this, and they do sometimes, I'll just bring out the numbers because, for example, I am the 8th female president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers, and out of I have these numbers somewhere. Actually, let me see if I can bring up these numbers because it's better if I reference them, because I actually wrote this down so I can. I'm 8 out of 32.
Wow.
And we have an annual award that is it's essentially a lifetime achievement award, the Grand Master, that we have been giving since 1965. And so there are something, however many, like 54 or 55 Grand Masters. And out of that time, there were, for a very, very long time, there were only 2 or 3 women who had gotten the Grand Master Award. And now that, and we've had several female presidents in a row, which is interesting because Kat Rambo served 2 terms, 4 years as president, and then Mary Robinette Kowal served 2 terms, or 2 years, 1 term, and now me. And Mary Robinette and I were both committed to choosing female grandmasters. I think Kat did 2 and 2, but we're really catching it up. And I get these. That's one of the perks of being president, is you get to choose the grandmaster. And so we also want to pick people who are authors who really influenced us. So this year I got to pick Mercedes Lackey, who was hugely formative author for me. Love her books. And and I get emails from these guys saying, well, this man really deserves to be recognized. And what I say to them is, so all those years where you guys were choosing man after man after man every year, did you look around and say, well, here's these women who really need to be recognized? So if you can show me that you did that, then I'll consider this. But otherwise, I don't want to listen.
Cool. You're awesome. I mean, yeah, you're the president, right? So it's your choice. You're right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about stories, right? So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change because they can help change cultural narratives and perspectives about social issues and traditions. So let's talk about writing stories and genre. In your books and stories, you've made it very clear that consent is vital in relationships and that incorporating this into the story isn't a death knell to romance. However, the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books, especially when fantasy and romance combine. Additionally, romance is a genre that has been criticized for being anti-feminist, providing unrealistic portrayals of sexual and romantic relationships and of glorifying toxic relationships. Do you think that this is an issue that writers in both fantasy and romance have started tackling successfully in recent years, or have you noticed a difference in the way each genre has progressed?
I think writers in both genres have been working very hard to tackle this. I think some of those criticisms are undeserved. Romance has been accused as being anti-feminist from the beginning, and I really do think that that's, it's an assault on a genre that is written primarily by women for women, and enjoyed by women, with that centers the female experience. This whole idea of creating unrealistic expectations, it's like it's unrealistic for women to expect to experience sexual pleasure and have satisfying relationships with men. If that's unrealistic, then we have a real problem. do think, I referenced earlier some of the, the rape-tastic novels from the 80s and the 70s. Yeah, there was a lot of toxicity to that. It's not, it's really not acceptable anymore. There are some subgenres where people like that, but even then it's still kind of massaged around with the male characters being redeemed. But like there's this whole bully romance and dark romance stuff.
Yeah.
But some people enjoy it for the fantasy of it, and I think that as long as that we don't judge each other for what we enjoy in fiction, I think that it's easy to say that what's in fiction should also be in real life. But the thing is like this whole idea of like that women get unrealistic expectations from reading it, or that they'll start wanting toxic relationships because they enjoy bully romance, really is undervaluing that women are independent human beings capable of rational judgment.
Yeah.
We know the difference between fact and fiction.
Okay. Before I ask my next question, I'm just going to put this comment on screen. This is in response to your answer about the grandmaster, choosing your grandmaster. So, yeah, bravo, Jeffe.
Thank you. I mean, that's how I feel. I am generally try to be very receptive, and I listen to a lot of stuff, but that's just not something that I have much patience for.
Yeah. Huh. How dare they? Okay. Okay, so my next question, going back to stories, and some of your female characters do experience or witness violence against women firsthand. Why do you include violence against women in your stories, and how do you decide when to show violence against women on the page and when not to?
I include it because I think that is a reality for the women reading the books. That you all probably have more statistics at your fingertips than I do, but the reality of it is that almost every woman is going to experience some form of sexual harassment, and another subset will experience some kind of sexual violence or sexual abuse. And to pretend like this is not something that women face in our world, and even if we're writing an alternate world, we're still writing for the people in our world, right? So it's like, this is reflective of our experience. This is reflective of our lives. And when to show it on page or not is always a delicate choice. In my Chronicles of Desneria books, the first book in that, Prisoner of the Crown, my heroine Jenna is basically sold into marriage by her family, and it's an incredibly abusive and cruel marriage. And I nearly didn't show some of that on the page, but I thought I really wanted to go there, and I think it's important to do it in a way that's not titillating. You don't want to make the rape titillating, but you want to show that this is this cruel, terrible thing that is entirely possible in this scenario. And it was kind of funny because I was in a writers group at the time, and a couple of the men really flinched from this, and they're like, oh, this is pretty awful, and maybe you should take some of this out. And I thought, well, but people suffer this kind of thing, and why would we not want to show it if that is the story we're telling?
Yeah, exactly. Now, what would you suggest to SFF authors who wish to include violence against women in their books? Any tips on how to do it?
Know why you're doing it. I think a lot of the backlash against the woman in the refrigerator trope, which I'll explain, comes from a comic book series. I don't remember which one, but that there was a like at the beginning of the story where the superhero's girlfriend was murdered and locked in a refrigerator. And then he goes on his vengeance streak. And her entire existence in the story was only to be murdered and locked in a refrigerator. And so that's something that we talk about a whole lot at The Woman in the Refrigerator. You don't want to have female characters whose sole existence in the story is to be brutalized to serve as motivation for a male character. If you are writing a female character and you want to show that she has endured something like this, you want to know why and what is this motivating her to do. And I think you want to be very realistic about the trauma, because there's another trope where like a woman is raped, and then she meets the hero and has sex with him, and she's just like magically healed, that because of magic or whatever. And I think paying attention to what trauma is like, what that post-traumatic stress, and what kinds of emotional healing are really involved in a situation like that is one way to handle it appropriately.
Okay. How do you think authors can strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Well, one of my mottos is that story always trumps agenda. So you always want to make sure that you're making the choices for the best kind of story, instead of trying to tell some kind of moral tale or transmit a lecture. If your purpose in writing it is to transmit a lecture or a moral, then you're probably going about it wrong. You need to tell the story and let the story illuminate whatever underpinning is there. If you have that idea in your head that you want to show the difficulty of being a female growing up in, under a very patriarchal monarchy or something like that, tell the story and that will come through. Trust your voice.
Okay. So more comments from the audience on things that you were saying just now. So Miss Yegan says, can we all agree that Deadpool 2 does a great job of making fun of the refrigerator female?
I thought they did a good job of it. I thought they danced perilously close to the line on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not love it because it was a little too close to The Woman in the Refrigerator for me. And I really liked Deadpool, and I enjoyed the movie overall, but I was like, oh, I don't know. It was
okay. Well, I guess it's subjective, like you were saying.
Yes.
Yeah, some people might find these kind of things like super preachy and like, but some people, it's just too subtle for them, or and sometimes it's just too close to the line.
I'm very sensitive to that particular trope, so.
Yeah, okay. All right. So Malia Harvey has a comment, and she says, yes, dealing with trauma and going through it is so great to see in a book. I always connect better with those characters and love them more.
Yeah, I do too. I think there's something that's really compelling about visiting someone else's emotional journey. Maybe it helps us heal some too, to be part of somebody else's emotional healing.
Yeah, it does help you understand what you're feeling, to see it.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So my next question is about geek culture. So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated, though there are rising numbers of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile and misogynist and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or even cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
I think having the women and girls there is what's making the difference. I think, just for example, like me being the third female president in a row of a organization that used to be famously paternalistic. We often referred to the old white guys, the old OWGs, the universe, that was how the organization was founded. But, now we're at this place where, we have, our board of directors is, largely female, and we have trans people and we have people of color. And as you have more and more people involved in guiding an organization or guiding a group or guiding a profession, you're going to see that migration of change. And I think the fact that so many of these guys who are misogynistic, that they are putting up such a fuss and complaining so vociferously, is a good sign that they are losing ground. It's like they're going to get edged out.
All right. Okay. So my next question, sorry, I was just looking at the comments. So my next question is about role models. So parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. You're a parent yourself. What do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
I think it's so much comes down to teaching our boys. And I think that that's something that we didn't used to do. We used to teach our girls how to manage the boys. And I think we need to teach the boys directly. There's still a lot of these ideas about what boys will and will not do that we have to get rid of. Like the idea that you can't give a boy a book that is all about girls because boys don't want to read about girls. Well, if we do that, then it just reinforces that for them.
Yeah. And girls read about boys all the time.
Right. And I confess that I am now at a point in my reading life where I almost never read male authors anymore. And it's because I read so many male authors for so much of my life that I feel like, I'm just trying to even it up.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. All right, so everyone who's watching, this is your last call for questions for Jeffe because we're almost at the end of the session. So get your questions in before we wrap up. So Jeffe, we've been talking for almost 1 hour, if you can believe it. These are my last two questions for you. So you've been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. It's a bit of an obvious question, but we asked this to all our guest authors. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Why do we support it? There's no reason why there should be the kind of violence against women and girls that we see in our culture today. I saw some statistics not long ago that a woman is the most likely time for a woman in her life to be murdered is when she's pregnant. And and the statistics are horrifying. And it's almost always by the father of her unborn child. I think that we need to show that men are responsible for pregnancy. That there are easy ways to stop pregnancy before it begins, and it doesn't the responsibility doesn't lie with women. And so I think that by writing different kinds of worlds, by writing both male and female characters who think about these things, who don't automatically default to this idea of that women must endure peril simply because they're female. I think that's how we start to change ideas and attitudes.
Right. Okay, great. So I'm going to put myself on screen. Hi, everybody. So we've come to the end of the questions, but we still have. So if you missed the beginning of the session, I'm going to tell everybody again about the amazing stuff that Jeffe has donated. So you can get your hands on all this stuff if you go to our Rally Up page. So here they are. For donors in the US only, Jeffe Kennedy is offering a very rare treat, a Tuckerization bundle for one generous Read for Pixels donor in the US. So this is one opportunity to name a minor character in Jeffy's next book, and then you get a signed copy of the book when it's released to keep as a memento. So there's only one of this unique treat. So it's $650. I made a mistake just now. So if you donate $650 before someone else does, then Jeffe will make sure that you live forever as a memorable minor character in her book. All right, so we have two more. These are for donors anywhere in the world. The first one is a one-to-one Zoom chat with Jeffe Kennedy. Jeffe is offering a chance for one donor of Read for Pixels to claim a 30-minute video chat with her, where she will be happy to share her insights on the art and craft of writing, chat about the business of publishing, or even just shoot the breeze about books in life. Okay, number 3, also available to donors worldwide, is Jeffe Kennedy's Critique Bundle. So if you're a romance, science fiction, fantasy, or general women's fiction author looking for a professional critique of your work, Jeffe is offering a fabulous critique bundle for one person, which is one written critique of your query letter draft, one critique of the first chapter of your work in progress, which should be 5,000 words maximum, and one 30-minute Zoom call to discuss the critique. It's a wonderful opportunity for anyone who's working to get their first book published and to get expert guidance from one of today's best-loved fantasy romance authors. And Jeffe is also the current president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, so she knows what she's talking about. So if romance is not your kind of thing, we also have plenty more other author goodies available from authors. We have Alaya Dawn Johnson, Amanda Boucher, Angela Yuriko Smith, Charlie N. Holmberg, Juliette Marillier, Lauren Willig, Linda D. Addison, Eloisa James, Mick Gardiner, Sujata Messi, Zank Books, Page Street Publishing, and so much more. And we're also releasing new goodies every week. So go back there and check. As of now, we've raised $2,077 towards our $5,000 goal. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on the 15th of April. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. I'm going to put a little slide on. Let's see, hope this works. Yes, there you go. So that's the link for you to go. In our Rally Up page is tinyurl.com/r4p Rally Up IWD 2022. So if you're typing it in, it's case sensitive, so just be careful. But our chat box moderators are putting the links in the chat box as well, so you can just go and click. And if you want to find out more about the Read for Pixels campaign and the other authors that we have on, go to bit.ly/readforpixels. The link is also going up in the chat box. Go and check it out. And then this is exciting. The Pixel Project's first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, is also now available. It's kind of like where the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Women. We have 16 amazing authors who wrote short stories for us, all a little bit of horror and a little bit of revenge. And we've teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors featured in the anthology to offer exclusive limited edition anthology bookplates for early bird buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates, and it'll be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So for more information on the anthology and how to score a bookplate, go to our website, bit.ly/givingthedevil link up in the chat box as well. And if you're interested in getting your very own copy of the anthology, you can order it from major booksellers worldwide, Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. Okay, and that's it. Oh, and if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, the kind of work we do, go and check out our website, www.thepixelproject.net. All right. Oh, Jeffe, I forgot to ask you, do you have any announcements you want to make? Anything coming up that you think people will be interested in?
Let's see. The only thing that comes to mind is that Dark Wizard, which I've been reading from, is now out in audiobook, and the sequel book 2 will be out in audiobook in the next couple of days. So I'm getting that up right now.
Awesome. Okay, can't wait. All right. So all that remains is to say thank you so much, Jeffe, for spending your time with us today and for the amazing discussion that we had. And thank you, everybody who asked questions and who attended. And we will say goodbye, good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.